Okay, it's 10 o'clock, I see. Wow. I'm really excited to welcome you all back today to Emerging Scholars in Premodern Critical Race Studies. And I want to introduce you to Lizzie Neary, Elizabeth Neary, who's our somewhat new Director of Fellowships. She just defended her dissertation yesterday. Congrats, Lizzie. And we're so grateful that she's here with us today on Saturday morning after defending to chair this exciting first panel. So I'm going to let her take it from here, and we'll be working behind the scenes to help out. So thanks, Lizzie.
Thank you so much, Leah. I am delighted to be here with all of you chairing this panel, the very first panel on the second day of the conference, Emerging Scholars in Pre-Modern Critical Race Studies. So this panel is titled Race on the Pre-Modern Stage. I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then their bios will be dropped in the chat to save a little bit of time. And then after all of our speakers have given their presentation, I welcome everyone to ask questions. You can raise your hand and ask questions with your video. And so if you don't mind introducing yourself, that would also be much appreciated. So without further ado, our first panelist, or our first presenter on the Race on the Pre-Modern Stage panel is Tamara Mahadin from Ohio State University. And Tamara will be presenting a paper titled Gendered and Racialized Physiognomies in Elizabeth Cary's closet drama, The Tragedy of Mariam.
Okay, hello everyone. Well, I want to say, first of all, good morning, wherever you're trying to join us from with the time difference. I would like to first thank you, Yasmin, the chair panelists, and the CRS team for planning this wonderful symposium. I'm learning so much from yesterday, so I'm going to hopefully continue learning today from you all. Okay. So when we know that a play was not intended for public performance, how should we approach the connection between physiognomy and drama? As a scientific method in early modernity, physiognomy was a way of knowing, a belief whereby external parts reveal inner virtue. In a closet drama like Elizabeth Cary's The Tragedy of Mariam, where characters' faces and bodies are central to the plot, but are not visible on the stage, contemplating and critiquing how characters' bodies come. Cary uses the word physiognomy twice in the play. However, our characters perceive one another's faces and bodies. Although physiognomy is often defined simply as face in anthologies and editions of Cary's Mariam, physiognomy encompasses more than just facial features. It includes the interpretation of the body as a whole. In his physiognomic manual, The Contemplation of Mankind, published in 1571, Thomas Hill defines physiognomy as a, quote, knowledge which leads a man to the understanding and knowing both of the natural motions and conditions of the spirit and the face and body, end quote. The face and body serve as windows to character traits, but this underscores a gendered perspective in the play. While previous scholarship on Cary's play has examined interpretation and significance of female character bodies, the epistemology that underpins gendered understanding of bodies has received far less attention. My talk today in Cary's play are confined to emphasizes the gender limitations imposed on female characters. However, due to time limit, my talk today builds on existing scholarship on race and gender by focusing on male characters, specifically Costobarus and Sylleus in Act 2, Scene 4. Throughout the scene, Cary repeats words like, quote, Arabian and Jew multiple times, prompting readers to remember the Constabarus and Sylleus are markedly in Barus and Sylleus before and after the fight, I argue that both men possess the masculinity and agency to reshape their racial identities through their actions, but their bodies remain subject to racialization. In Act 2, Scene 4, the scene begins with commentary on Salome's racialized and gender body, and then transitions to Cary's preoccupation with the bodies of Constabarus and Sylleus. Sylleus challenges Constabarus to defend Salome's honor through combat, but Constabarus refuses, prompting Sylleus to call him a, quote, coward, end quote. Likewise, Constabarus counters by recalling Herod's war against the Arabians, describing them as, quote, fate Arabians, end quote. As Ian Smith notes, Blood, quote, reproduces the discourse of race in the early modern period by referencing groups, lineage, and family, end quote. In Cary's play, Constabarus characterizes the Arabians as faint, implying their racial inferiority. He contrasts their weakness with his own sword, which symbolizes his bravery. Therefore, blood becomes a tool for establishing hierarchical distinctions among racial groups, reinforcing racial hierarchies and tensions of power. The Verber Achilles shifts to a racially charged fight scene, prompting readers to imagine a physical fight that magnifies the racial hostility between them. Considering the play's geographical spaces, I argue that the fight scene between Constabarus and Sylleus reenacts the battle Herod waged on Arabs. It invites readers to envision the racial hostilities in the stage directions, quote, they fight, end quote. Therefore, the racial hostility between Constabarus and Sylleus stems from their perception of each other as racialized individuals. Their ethnic identities are deeply embedded and intertwined with their rivalry long before Salome's relationship with Sylleus. Sylleus's Arab ethnicity and Constabarus's Jewish identity leads to a physical, quote, race war, end quote, like that described in Ian Smith's analysis of Shakespeare's Othello in Black Shakespeare. When Sylleus fights Constabarus and is stabbed, Sylleus invokes the sword again to prove his bravery, saying, quote, thy sword hath made some windows for my blood to show a hard crimson physiognomy, end quote. Sylleus's bloody form aligns with his body's humoral balance, affecting his emotions due to his sustained injury. Cary's use of the word physiognomy suggests a shift in Sylleus's perception of his own body, as the gushing blood signifies an emotional change resulting from his altered physiology. In vernacular medical texts, bodily fluids, especially blood, are frequently described using moral value to emphasize concept of differentiated worth. Post-fight, the men's perspectives on the significance of their racial identities transforms and shift, but their physical bodies continue to be defined by their ethnicity. After the injury, Constabarus refers to Sylleus as a, quote, brave Arabian, end quote. Sylleus likewise reciprocates by calling Constabarus a, quote, noble Jew, end quote. The fight scene thus challenges the link between race and moral qualities, but does not erase the racial distinctions in their physical appearance. Even though Constabarus helps Sylleus, he still says, quote, I hate thy body, but I love thy mind, end quote. This contrast shows that for the characters, bodies are reminders that they are ethnically different, despite any newfound appreciation for each other's moral values. Sylleus too regards Constabarus as a, quote, courteous foe, end quote. In their interactions, Jewish and Arab bodies symbolize racial distinctions, with Constabarus disliking Sylleus's appearance while respecting his courageous mindset. Towards the end of the scene, Constabarus and Sylleus discuss becoming friends, but the bodily friendship both characters swore by is short-lived. Sylleus explains that the animosity between both can lead to friendship. Sylleus says, quote, stern enmity to friendship can no art, had not my heart and tongue engaged me so, end quote. By mentioning his tongue, Sylleus asserts his passion for Constabarus. Despite his love for Salome, he is still willing to fulfill Constabarus's wish. In the case of Constobarus and Sylleus, their friendship remains temporary. By the end of the play, we learn of Constobarus's death through the final chorus, but we are left uncertain about Sylleus's fate. Despite recognizing each other's bravery, Constobarus and Sylleus's physicality is still framed by social notions of race, demonstrating how even expression of masculinity are shaped by racialized perceptions. Some scholars suggest that the imagery of the horrid crimson blood from Sylleus aligns with the adventure of public stage performance, and with the more subdued highlights the significance of charged dialogues between Constobarus and Sylleus. Thus, I argue that this scene invites us to reconsider how we connect physiognomy and drama, suggesting that even with a work not intended for public performance, the representation of bodily descriptions and interpretations can challenge and redefine established notions of identity formation and understanding. Cary encourages us to rethink the relationship between bodily representation and identity formation of both female and male characters, prompting a re-evaluation of how we perceive and interpret characters within both literary and performative contexts. Because closet dramas are meant to be racialized bodies in Cary's play, while traditional closet dramas may emphasize rhetorical performance over bodily actions, Cary's Mariam challenges this notion by integrating a strong focus on the descriptions and interpretations of these bodies. Cary's play is comprised of very long speeches, but Cary also emphasizes the importance of female and male bodies as means of acquiring knowledge. Cary's Mariam thus does not just unveil facets of character personalities through their physical attributes, it also determines the gendered way these characteristics are racially perceived and comprehended. Thank you. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Tamara, for that fantastic presentation. Time for applause. I invite anyone to drop questions in the chat now, but they will be asked after all of our presenters have finished. So I'm delighted to now introduce Emily MacLeod, presenting a paper titled Sweet Faces and White Hands, Tricky Constructions of Race in Ben Jonson's Cynthia Revels.
Thank you so much. I do have some slides. It says that sharing isn't turned on, but oh, great. Okay, perfect. Okay. So, hello, my name is Emily MacLeod. I'm so honored to be presenting alongside my co-panelists and as a part of this symposium. Thank you so much to the Newberry and everybody involved for bringing us together to have these very important conversations. The work I'll be presenting today is part of a book project titled Boyish Tricks, Performing Race and Repertory on the Blackfriars Stage. In this project, I argue that boy actors in the children's company at the Blackfriars in early 17th century London engaged in developing racecraft on the early modern stage through their tricks of imitation and transformation. My focus today will be on Ben Jonson's The Fountain of Self-Love, also known as Cynthia's Revels, and how images of deformity, apes, white hands, sweet faces, and sweating courtiers made up a white racializing assemblage in the repertory of these boy actors. I use this term white racializing assemblage after Arthur L. Little Jr. in his introduction to the collection White People in Shakespeare. Arthur Little, among many other scholars like Kim F. Hall, Patricia Akini, David Sterling Brown, Ian Smith, Farah Karim Cooper, and Gitanjali Shahani, some of whose recent monographs are pictured here, inform my talk today on how race and specifically whiteness is constructed in this period through the sensorium that was the early modern playhouse. Jonson's play is one of the first performed by the children of the Queen's Revels at Blackfriars when the company was reestablished around 1600. In Cynthia's Revels, where Cynthia is a clear analog for Queen Elizabeth. We see to our infant, self-absorbed, social advanced. The relationship here between social status, form, ability with a foreign other can begin at home as well. In Cynthia's Revels, Jonson uses the word race in terms that evoke class, performance, and the marked or unmarked body. The disguised god Mercury says that, quote, the better race in court that have the true nobility called virtue, end quote, will be able to separate themselves from the apish customs and forced garbs of illegitimate courtiers. This better race is unblemished, he says, and the gods have formed them of better metal and in better mold than their inferior colleagues. Some of these inferior courtiers in Cynthia's Revels desire to change themselves to fit certain social codes of conduct, but they are mocked for their striving. Others are deemed capable of this kind of mutability and are able to protect their whiteness from being thus marked by labor or strain. The demonstrations of this mutability by the child players themselves required theatrical skill and created a humorous spectacle for the audience who might have recognized the posturing of the child actors as reflecting something from their own court experiences. One of the most intriguing characters in the play is Amorphous, known as the deformed traveler, with a name that suggests both formlessness and an ability to take on many forms. Mercury actually categorizes Amorphous's formlessness as a kind of deformity. Amorphous, a traveler, one so made out of the mixtures and shreds of forms that himself is truly deformed. That Amorphous is so marked by his travel to foreign places that he is transformed from an Englishman to a kind of hybrid form speaks to anxieties of foreign influence on English courtiers and the desire to police the boundaries of whiteness. Amorphous's penchant for mimic tricks and apish customs puts him in a line of English apes, the title of William Rankin's 1588 book, The English Ape, the Italian Imitation, the Footsteps of France. The recurring image of the ape in English history plays, as well as comical satires, speaks to an anxiety about national identity and the tendency to ape or imitate other nations, which disables them from forming an identity of their own. In Shakespeare's Richard II, the Duke of York uses a striking disability metaphor to describe reports of fashions in proud Italy, whose manners still our tardy apish nation limps after in base imitation. Children's plays also use the figure of the ape to voice anxieties of foreign influence. In the opening scene of Chapman's Sir Giles Goosecap, there's confusion over whether a servant is in fact a man or a baboon. Out, ye moped monkeys! Can ye not know a man from a marmoset in these Frenchified days of ours? The influence of French and Italian fashions transforms these Englishmen into hybrid creatures, reframing the boundaries of whiteness through language of nationality, animality, and deformity. Amorphous instructs Asotus, a courtier in training, in scenes that very well could reflect the training of young players. Asotus is described in terms that could well suit a successful and desirable boy actor. He is a most delicate youth, a sweet face, a straight body, a well-proportioned leg and foot, a white hand, a tender voice. His youth, whiteness, and able-bodiedness strike both the women and the men, like Amorphous, as being attractive. Sweetness comes up in multiple areas of this play, from Asotus's sweet disposition to travel to the sweet water from the fountain of self-love that the courtiers indulge in. In the meta-theatrical induction, one of the boys suggests to another that he should use some sugar candied to sweeten. Here speaks to this early 17th century cultural moment where sugar became synonymous with emerging systems of slavery and imperialism in the global South. Asotus's white hand echoes many such uses of the phrase in regards to women, chastity, purity, and social class in early modern drama. The pairing of sweetness with white hands can be seen throughout early modern plays as well. From Barone in Love's Labour's Lost, asking his white-handed mistress for one sweet word, or Herod in The Tragedy of Mariam. Oh, what a hand she had, it was so white. I never more shall see so sweet a sight. The bright color of sugar itself links these ideas of whiteness, beauty, and the sensing of race in early modern England. The god Mercury, who spies on the courtiers, describes Asotus as one who doth most of these tricks after Amorphous, sweats to imitate him in everything as if he were molded of him. Asotus' sweat indicates a strain, an effect of physical labor or effort that should be absent from the careless, free body of the courtier. The tricks by sweat belies his actual inclusion in the courtly sphere. Towards the end of the play, Asotus expresses disappointment at the interruption of the proclaimed revels, saying, "And Cynthia had but seen me dance a strain or do but one trick, I had been kept in court." Asotus believes that just one trick would have set him up for life. Jonson's descriptions of court performance rely heavily on the idea of the trick as a means for social advancement. The importance of the trick to court performance shows how flimsy the veneer is, that one must perform tricks, which could also be classified as deceptions, in order to be admitted. The courtly characters in Cynthia's Revels model how white Englishmen and women become racialized subjects through the instability of their own whiteness, or, as Arthur Little writes, whiteness becomes more visible and legible when read as contestations going on within whiteness itself. The sweat of Asotus demonstrates the courtier's fear of the exclusionary power of the court that demarcates true whiteness or Englishness. By focusing on the forms of these court types and their tricks, Jonson emphasizes the importance of proper conduct and the cultivation of courtly manners through performance, as well as punishment for excessive self-love and the policing of bad conduct. In my book project, I put this argument about the play text into its original performance context in the Children's Company at Blackfriars. Child actors are significant and under-theorized subjects in the study of early modern racecraft contributed to the racializing strategies of their repertory. I argue in this project that emerging ideas about race, class, and childhood on the early modern stage were linked with constructions of whiteness and ability in the early modern era. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing questions and suggestions for further research in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Emily, for that wonderful presentation. I'm so appreciative. Now we will move on to our final presenter, Lydia Valentine from King's College, London. And Lydia will be presenting a paper titled Bastardizing Race, Illegitimate Kinship, and Racial Mixing in The Winter's Tale and Lust's Dominion.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just want to echo my fellow panelists by saying a huge thank you to the Newberry and to the organisers for putting together a wonderful symposium and for making it online so I can join from across the ocean. Thank you. In Act 4, Scene 4 of The Winter's Tale, the poor lowly maid Perdita and her adoptive family hold a sheep shearing ceremony. As Perdita delivers flowers to her guests, she explains the absence of certain varieties. Sir, the year growing ancient, not yet on summer's death, nor on the birth of trembling winter, the fairest flowers of the season are our carnations and streaked gillivores, which some call nature's bastards. Of that kind our rustic garden is barren, and I care not to get slips of them. My doctoral research focuses on the ways that early modern understandings of kinship inform the representation of race on the professional stage. In my analysis of The Winter's Tale, I examine the role that bastardy, as an illegitimate form of kinship, plays within Perdita's metaphor. I argue that in early modern England, there was a long-standing cultural association of bastardy with both illegitimacy and hybridity, meaning that bastardy was often represented as a form of racial mixing. For instance, in a Latin-English dictionary published in 1552, Richard Hulot translates the word spurious as a bastard begotten between base and gentle, or between conjugate and single. This definition captures a longer etymological history in which bastardy could refer both to illegitimate children and to children of mixed parentage. Since the inception of pre-modern critical race studies, scholars have demonstrated that the earliest uses of the term race were related to rank, lineage, and blood, to a way of distinguishing between the gentle race and the base race. It follows that racial mixing could also be understood in these terms. After all, terms like base and gentle categorize individuals according to their familial status, suggesting that their place within a hierarchy is fixed from birth, and that gentle individuals are naturally superior to base individuals. In this way, Hulot's definition demonstrates how bastardy constitutes a form of racial mixing, and one which does not necessarily rely on a difference in external bodily features. Correspondingly, Perdita's description of the street gillivores as nature's bastards plays into a long-standing association of bastardy with mixture or hybrid forms. The label bastards draws attention to the gillivores as a variety of flowers created through cross-fertilization across different species. Hence, the mention of slips refers to the process of grafting, in which two plants, the stock and the scion, were blended together in order to improve the plant's qualities. In early modern English culture, the process of grafting proved an apt metaphor for racial mixing. As Jean Feerick reminds us, grafting intersected in compelling ways with the period's discourses of difference surrounding race, nation, and kind, since it strove to conjoin two plants bearing some degree of unlikeness. Crucially, in The Winter's Tale, the term bastards is explicitly tied to the process of grafting and its connotations of racial mixing. Scholarship has already highlighted how the bastard resists neat categorization in early modern drama, with Michael Neal identifying the bastard as an out-of-joint member of a hybrid genus, who is defined as neither one thing or the other. Yet, this scholarship rarely considers the racial implications of this dramatic representation of bastardy. In The Winter's Tale, I argue, Perdita takes a particularly hostile position towards bastardy because it is a form of racial mixing. Despite acknowledging that these are the fairest flowers, Perdita boasts that her garden is inhospitable to this hybrid species and expresses no desire to get slips of them. In asserting that her garden is barren to striped gillivores, this space comes to represent a womb which refuses to host bastards, playing into bastardy's dual signification of illegitimacy and mixed or hybrid forms. For Perdita, then, the bastard is the undesirable product of a natural mixture. In my research, I use this moment from The Winter's Tale as an entry point into stage as a sexual relationship between a white Spanish queen, Eleazar. When the King of Spain dies, Eleazar pursues the Spanish crown by Philip, the king's second son, is a bastard. In the process, the play represents bastardy as a direct consequence of racial mixing. Within the play, Eleazar and the queen never produce illegitimate offspring, but her relationship with the Moorish prince repeatedly undermines the legitimacy of her children. Indeed, one of the poems which prefaces the 1657 edition of the play explains that a queen is pictured here whose lustful flame was so insatiate that she sought to bastardize her royal issue that a Moor might rise. From the very beginning of Lust's dominion, the play highlights how the queen's extramarital affair with Eleazar threatens the legitimate succession of the Spanish crown. When the queen makes pleas for Eleazar's affection and is turned away, she remarks that Eleazar loved me once. Eleazar responds with the remark, "That can thy bastards tell." By suggesting that the queen's bastards function as evidence of their relationship, Eleazar implies that her children, or at least some of them, are his. What's more, in Titus Andronicus, Aaron the Moor reveals how easy it would be to replace his darker complexioned child with the fair son of his countrymen, setting a precedent in early modern drama that a racially mixed child could pass as a white child. In this context, the queen's relationship with Eleazar raises the very real possibility that the king's heirs could in fact be the Moor's own bastards, since their blackness could be virtually undetectable. This allusion to the bastardy of the royal bloodline is made more the queen to claim that her illicit born who would only bring war and vengeance and desolation if he were crowned king of fair Spain. After instructing the friars, Cole and Crabbe, to spread rumours that Philip is base begotten, Eleazar is able to manipulate Philip's allies into believing that the Spanish community hate him for his birth. What strikes me most about these rumours is their ability to drastically transform Philip's racial identity. Since his mother is already sexually involved with a North African prince, the rumours of his bastardy inevitably raise questions about whether he is truly a fair Spaniard. Indeed, Philip himself reflects that I may well be transformed from what I am when a black devil is husband to my dam. Philip's sense that he is transformed from what he is highlights the extent to which the rumours of his illegitimacy rewrite the fabric of his identity. It's the relationship between Eleazar, the black devil, and the queen, his dam, which Philip identifies as the trigger for his transformation. Reflecting on the world's opinion that the damned Moor had interest in my birth, Philip seems to suggest that the allegations of his illegitimacy have additionally come to suggest that Eleazar is his father. The idea that Eleazar has interest in Philip's birth could mean several things. That Eleazar takes interest in Philip's birth as a tool through which he can seize control of the Spanish crown. That Eleazar's status, wealth, and property depend upon the public view that Philip is illegitimate. Or, most significantly, that Eleazar played a part in producing Philip. Even if these are just allegations, Philip recognizes that he may well be transformed from what he is, reconfiguring his transformation as a process of becoming both illegitimate and racially mixed. The truth of these rumours seems to have little influence over this transformation, as, in the public eye, Philip has already been tainted with blackness. One of the rumours that he is illegitimate and racially mixed, Lust's dominion raises the possibility that children of mixed parentage could reach positions at the highest levels of society without their racial identity being detected. When Philip identifies Eleazar as a true-stamped son of hell, whose pedigree is written in his face, he ascribes a legibility to blackness which marks Moors this idea that genealogical blackness is always legible. After all, in early modern England, paternity was notoriously difficult to prove, even in cases where a husband suspected his wife of adultery. Here we can recognise a certain continuity between the two plays discussed in this paper. In The Winter's Tale, the representation of bastardy as a form of racial mixing reveals a set of intertwined anxieties about legitimacy and the preservation of racial identity. And in Lust's Dominion, bastardy is used to explore concerns about how the assimilation of Black individuals into European societies threatened to undermine the legitimacy of white kinship. In this way, concerns about the legibility of illegitimacy are transferred into concerns about the legibility of racial mixing. And in Lust's Dominion, the playwrights highlight the difficulty of accurately identifying both bastards and racially mixed children. As a result, I read the racialization of bastardy in early modern drama as part of a longer-standing effort to delegitimize specific forms of kinship, and particularly forms of kinship which threaten to transform the racial fabric of white European communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lydia. That was such an interesting presentation. So now I just want to clarify how we will do the Q&A because I might have misspoke before. If everyone could first put their questions in the chat, even if you want to ask the question yourself, that would be great. And then I will call on people. And if you don't turn on your camera or specify that you'd like to do so, I'll read the question for you. Otherwise, I invite everyone to read the questions themselves. That think, breathe.
I can see a question in the chat. I'm not sure if everyone else can see.
Yeah, and Leah specified too that audience members can feel free to use the Q&A button for questions. So I'll go right ahead with a question from Margot for Lydia. How do you read Perdita's remarks on bastardy in relation to the plot of the play, animated partly by Leontes' fears that Perdita is a bastard? Does this context change how we might hear this speech? Or does her legitimate birth endorse her negative racialized valuation of bastardy?
You've secretly read my thesis behind my back. So in the first part of this chapter, I actually address the kind of first half of The Winter's Tale. And I think specifically about Leontes' fears about bastardy, about adultery. And I start to pick up on some of the colour symbolism that's happening in that half of the play. So for instance, Leontes expressing that he feels muddy, the idea of mixture or lack of clarity. But also there's a repeated kind of association in that half of legitimate issue as being fair. So Antigonus specifically says that, you know, if Hermione has actually committed adultery, I'll castrate all my daughters because I'd rather not have heirs than not have illegitimate heirs because they're not fair issue. So I kind of link it back to that conversation at the start of the play about bastardy as something which is definitely understood not as being fully white. I think it's complicated. I'm not illegitimate children are being seen as racially mixed, maybe in the sense that we would understand it, but rather that these characters who are theatrically were in relation to part of the reason I wanted to write about it is because it's a scene that I've kind of had a lot of different interpretations of over the last few years of my research. I think specifically as well, kind of trying to work out the sincerity of both Perdita's point of view and Polixenes' point of view. There's been a lot of debate about the sincerity of their arguments and their motivations for making those arguments. I think I do read Perdita as taking a hostile position, and that kind of being a reference to her kind of at that point unknown kind of royal whiteness and more elite whiteness. There's all these references to the fact she's above her breeding, that she's kind of remarkably fair, that they've never seen white hands. But there's also like this really curious reference to her whiteness as being curds and creams, which seems like a reference to makeup, which is then like a kind of more negative connotation. So yeah, I'm still trying to work out this scene for myself. But I think that the two parts of the plot are very much related in this regard. And I think that we have to read that grafting scene in relation to the first half of the play, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Lydia. I have a question for all of the panelists, and I also, if the panelists are interested in asking each other questions, or to the extent that this can become a dialogue, feel free to do so. You are free to jump in and ask each other questions. But all of your presentations made me think about how the stage at this moment in the early modern period is really a laboratory for testing out racial ideas, right? The static notion that there is one race that's not changing is really called into question in these works that you're dealing with. And I think it shows us how the stage often puts race in a comparative context, right? Race becomes more legible when we see two different races interacting, dialoguing, or multiple, right? And it's often put into context of class, right? How do class dynamics influence the legibility of race? So I wanted to ask you all this question of how do you see the form of a play, either written or performed, influencing how racial identities are being conceived? And do you think that it offers us sort of a new perspective, the fictional nature of that?
I guess I can start by thinking about, it's interesting you use the word like the form of the play, because that was a word that I think we all touched on in terms of our work, and that, it's interesting to think about how plays were shaped by the theatrical conditions in which, they were written, that, I focus on plays that were written for young actors. Tamara is talking about a closet drama, which is in itself like a different form. So thinking about how and Tamara said also like that bodies, thinking about the reading into bodies, right? That is such a crucial part of performance studies, right? Thinking about the body in motion, the body in relation to other bodies. So I would say that being able to consider the theatrical conditions of these texts is crucial to understanding the many different ways that race can signify, and that it isn't a stable or fixed idea. It's something that is transforming and being marked in all these different ways, and I think the way that language is used, that language that Lydia was talking about with that these rumors could put pressure on this body. I found that to be fascinating as well. So I'll stop there.
Go, Lydia. I'll go
Okay.
next.
Yeah, I loved your description of the stage as this kind of laboratory. I think I definitely think of it as a testing ground for ideas. And I think that's part of the joy of working with this material, is that I think it resists like an easy interpretation. And I think that in terms of form, it's for me, form like especially with plays definitely is informing. About writing tragic comedy, visual mixing, and like the hybridity discussion in the grafting scene. It does definitely seem to me that the form of a play, the language of the play, and the performance of the play are all working together to kind of influence the way that racial identity is being conceived, definitely. And kind of building on Emily's point, I think we've spoken about this in our kind of pre-panel discussion, but specifically thinking about like the relationship between like language and performance, and remembering that these plays were things that were being seen, heard, in some cases. Remember that the form of these texts, the physical form as well, is really playing an important role in these performances.
Yeah, so building on both of your ideas, um, when I for my dissertation chapter, that's when I realized it's not just like bodies and faces. Sometimes it's like foreheads, eyes, like every single body part is being observed very carefully in in Cary's play, and I think it's because it's a closet drama, and Cary wants readers to conjure these meanings. Like, I'm not just describing to you what they look like, but I'm also associating these meanings. It could be because this play is not going to be performed. So I'm going to kind of push that limit on the meaning itself so you can get through them. So it was I was reading it, it's like, okay, if I read like the person was reading the paradigm, they will get the gist of it. Lydia, you mentioned like mongrel, Salome has been described like that by Herod. So that means like there's a certain way that Cary wants to portray each character, and she is very specific to how they want to be portrayed. And the second thing, while I was reading, because there's a lot of scholarship on female characters, like there's a lot of scholarship on Mariam, a lot of scholarship on Salome. So I was really trying to say, okay, let me see other characters. How are the male characters are being portrayed? And it's kind of similar, but still the males, the women have a lot of bodily parts, specific bodily parts that are specified, not like the male characters. And I'm wondering, is because of their gender and the masculinity that, we're not going to, your gender, you're male, we don't have to go through details and specify like your hair, the way you look, your face, your eyes and forehead. We don't have to do that. So it's the word of physiognomy then, when I tried to analyze that sentence, that word, is it the face? Is it the body? Like, what are they describing? Where was Soleil's injured? And if it's staged, how would we stage it? Where is the injury located? So that is one thing. So, and then I also read when A.M. Smith's book said about Black Shakespeare, that early modern, modernity, they had that racial literacy, right? So if they had that racial literacy, if they went on stage and saw multiple production, when they were reading Tragedy of Mariam, they were already understanding the language. They were already understanding these references. So yeah, I hope that, answered the question.
Thank you so much, Tamara. That's so interesting. And I wonder if either of our panelists want to respond. Lydia, it looks like you have your hand up. Please.
Unmute. Lydia,
you're muted.
Thank you so much. I'm not a tech whiz, as you can tell. Yeah, I had another question actually, but I will quickly just agree that something that had come up through these talks and through our panel was the fact that we're really talking about race in connection with so many different other categories of identity and hierarchies. And I would really love to hear from my fellow panelists about how they approach these kind of knotty connections, like how you work with all these different kind of factors when we're talking about race.
Yeah, because I was thinking when Tamara was talking about that in Tragedy of Mariam, you don't get this blazon of the male characters talking about their eyes, their face. That's exactly what we get in the play I'm talking about with a young man saying he has this sweet face and this white hand, and so that I'm really interested in how masculinity is being framed in this very feminine way. And I'm a lot of my work is about thinking about age, thinking about the way that younger men were sometimes feminized. And the young actors playing, but just so much, as you say, so ability, right? There are all these vectors that are working together intersectionally to produce these racial formations, right? That there's kind of this constellation of these different identity formations working toward this idea of what race might be or how race might be read. So I'm really interested in digging more into that, the kind of gender and sexuality along with ability and race in the work I do. But it is challenging to manage those different things. And I think really digging into kind of this close reading of the text and acknowledging how these things are being put alongside each other in the text can help to elucidate on the connections between them.
Yeah, so yeah, building on the idea of, so one of the things like as trying to manage, the analysis and like trying to work through your text. When I was, I first began with Mariam and Salome, and then I saw that there's a lot of mention of Cleopatra and the tragedy of Mariam, but she's not there, right? She's not present, but she's mentioned by Mariam, by Alexandra, who is Mariam's mother. At the end, before her death, Mariam echoes Cleopatra and starts like cursing her. And then saying basically like, she kind of turned she turned to Mary, she turned like Cleopatra, according to Herod, because of her falseness. And then what I've noticed is that it's just women, when they tried to change how their body is being perceived, there's immediately rejection. Like you can't change how we read you a certain way. We interpreted your body in a certain way. Once you decide you want to change that, there's going to be a backlash, which is why Herod, he could not believe the rumors. But when he saw Mariam in darker clothes and the way she's talking is different, that was like another assertive moment. Oh, she has changed. So I'm just going to go, like, basically, execute her. And you have Salome, who tries her best to show her real, like, I want a divorce. I want what I want, right? Like Herod married a second wife. It was no problem for him, but she wants to divorce the second to marry the third, and she can't. So it's this idea of there's definitely a gender perspective in the play working out where, male characters can get a pass. They can, change how others see them. Yes, they're still racialized, but their moral values and, virtues can change easily, but women can't because there's already, an imposed reading on them. So that's one thing that I was trying to look at in the play is like there's definitely Herod, and also Herod accusing Salome of mixed, being mixed and calling her all these names, and I'm like, but she's your sister, so you're mixed, like, so it's just the gender already, because she's female, it's already like definitely it's going to be a lot of scrutinization of the female bodies more than the male bodies.
I'm interested in because another thing we talked about in our pre-panel chat was about canonicity and how we were working with texts other than Winter's Tale, like non-Shakespeare texts, even a closet drama. Miriam certainly is getting more attention now, but I'm curious what my fellow panelists think about what these non-canonical theatrical texts kind of bring to the table and why it matters to kind of include things that don't actually have much of a modern performance history. Because I was thinking too a lot when you were talking about closet drama that the reader has to imagine. Well, I have to imagine when I'm reading Cynthia's Revels by Ben Jonson. I've never seen this performed. I don't know. There's no recordings. I don't know of any examples to look at, right? Similar for Lust Dominion. So kind of thinking about that, the non-canonical texts and thinking about theater history without a performance records, or kind of examples to draw from in that realm. So I'd love to hear what you both think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I did have to sneak some Shakespeare in there, I must say. But I think that I find so much value in exploring that wider canon. I think that something I'm really fascinated in is where tropes get picked up across different playwrights, across different companies, the time specifically that they're happening as well. Like there's a new project happening in the UK where they've kind of created a database of all reference to like non-Christian, non-European characters and kind of charted it across the years. And you can see like where these trends are appearing, like say just after the Spanish Armada, there's a spike in characters, and I think that part of the benefit of thinking about that wider canon is really thinking about these broader cultural trends and also the moments at which they're challenged and subverted, not just kind of proliferating. Um, and I think that there's definitely a challenge with working with these plays in terms of like, if I want to think about Shakespearean performance, I can look at 20 productions of one play. Um, Whereas with these other plays, like really having to sit with it and sit with the language and sit with your imagination, I personally find more enjoyable in some ways because I think that it's a real test of yeah, I guess just your imagination. But I've really enjoyed thinking about the wider canon and also placing these kind of more like canonical Shakespeare plays in conversation with other playwrights to show, like playwright wasn't this like one literary genius who like is the only person we need to think about like that was during this period. And yeah, I think it's important to challenge his kind of iconicity as well, definitely.
I just want to mention briefly that because we just made the production of The Faithful Shepherdess by John Fletcher, it has a lot of racialized language. And the Faithful Shepherdess has received like, this play is ridiculous, even like we have actual evidence that the audience hated it. But when we staged it, it was like, it does make sense. It doesn't have like the epilogue that you would think, I mean the ending, we don't have the prologue at the end that kind of have that streamline of what happens next, but it makes sense. But also like when we put the live production working in rehearsals, like, oh wow, is from reading, like imagine it. Just character, like we have to put the stages and the props. But also at the same time, as you said, Lydia, we don't have like 20 productions of The Faithful Shepherdess. So it does give us a lever of how we want to stage it. But at the same time, we are not being influenced when we read the play by other interpretation when it's not canonical, like it's not part of the canon, right? We have that agency where like, okay, we can interpret it in a way that we think, makes sense to us, even if there's no live productions, so we haven't seen them. And I think I enjoy them more, as you said, Lydia. Like I enjoy that kind of reading and looking at the language and how it's working when there's not like a lot of productions. But I still miss that part too, because I enjoy like, watching plays.
I wanted to like quickly invoke my rights as like um, Tamara, when you were Shakespeare and Fletcher's Henry VIII, which I've worked on a lot thinking about the racialization of Anne Boleyn. And now I'm like, what would happen? As Lydia said, it's something I love when we put two things together and see what happens. So what would happen if we put this play that was co-written together alongside a play that's just Fletcher? And really look at, hands up, but like the wheels were turning and I'm so excited. And this conversation and discussion is really rich. And I'm taking so many notes and I'm definitely going to be reaching out to you all to chat more.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. That's so interesting. I want to let our panelists respond to that, but I also want to make sure that Amber is able to ask a question. So panelists, if you have ideas and responses to Yasmin, please hold on to them. And Amber, if you'd like to ask your question, go ahead.
Thank you so much for these amazing presentations. I found them really interesting. So I don't do literature or drama. I'm a historian, so I feel a bit far out from this. So I'm sorry if my question isn't viable, but I was thinking about what we talked about yesterday with reception and production and thinking about the difference between them too. And I was wondering if any of you have any sources for the reception of these, if you have any sources, diaries, critics, letters, anyone talking about the body, sweetness, whiteness, bastardy, any of these key things we've been talking about, because I'd be really interested how people saw these plays. I know Tamara mentioned that one of the audiences hated a play, so I was just thinking more about audience reactions.
That too is something I think. Where's the diary where someone says exactly the experience of what it was like seeing a play and what they did before, what they did after, who else was there? I think in terms of the play I talked about today, there's in several early modern plays, they have these induction or kind of prologue scenes where I mentioned it's meta theatrical. It shows the children are playing themselves and they're interacting with the audience, and there are references to audiences in those little introductory scenes. Um, but whether the portrayal of the audience by the playwright is based on a reality of what the audience is something that needs to be like put pressure on, because we don't know, right? They might be, especially for someone like Jonson. Jonson kind of notoriously thought audiences were terrible. So he was often making fun of audience members, which fits into the satirical genre that he was writing as well. But yeah, that and from my experience, it's very rare that you actually get evidence of what audiences thought based on how many times a play was printed. That can signal a kind of popularity. But I'll let my other panelists answer as well.
Yeah, I think this is something I wish we had more of. Um, I think that there's like some anomalies. Like I'm thinking about the Mask of Blackness and like Dudley Carleton's letter, where he kind of describes the ugly sight of seeing these women performing as like African princesses. But those like kind of little glimpses we get into how these things were received, obviously that's a court performance as well, are very rare. And I think that this is something which I come up a lot in my research, specifically on like the kind of theatrical practices of performing races, audience perception of these bodies on stage. Like, are they temporarily imagining that they're actually seeing a black person on the stage, or do they remain aware of the technologies being used? Like, are they aware it's a white actor using racial prosthetics, to use Ian Smith's term? And again, I wish we kind of had more information on that experience, because I think kind of because obviously these performances of race were using lots of different technologies, and I wish we could have more of an insight into how these were perceived and experienced in the playhouse. And it's definitely something which I have to keep keep kind of thinking over, specifically in my work on kind of performances of Blackness.
So regarding the tragedy of Mariam, I mean, it's a closet drama, and at the same time, most, in the 80s, most approaches to studying the play was thinking about Cary's life in relationship to the play. And then later on, it shifted, and, people started not putting Cary's life on the side and, working with the text as it is. But The Faithful Shepherdess, there is a to the reader preface in The Faithful Shepherdess when it was printed, and it was written by John Fletcher, signed it out. And that's when he kind of explained what a tragi-comedy is, and defending the tragi-comedy, saying like, I know you didn't like it, but here's what, it's nice. Like, I like it. Because it didn't meet the expectation of that time. So we do have that. So if you would like to read the preface, that would be great. As for if you're interested in the tragedy of Mariam, we did hopefully you'll like it, Looking for Mariam film documentary in the spring, and it was directed by Elizabeth Kolkovich, and with the help of her students in the Mansfield campus. So it was on Zoom, so we did all that. So hopefully the material will provide you with really good information, whether you're a historian, but I think it has a lot of good material that you can talk through with your students about like race and gender. And we even talk about like the chorus a little bit too. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for that question, Amber. And I just wanted to circle back maybe to Yasmin's comment and question. And Yasmin, if you have more to add, feel free. Otherwise, we can let our panelists respond.
Oh, they can totally respond or not respond. It's up to you. I was just in the moment so excited about the conversation, and I was like, I really want to jump in, and I was just like, should I? And I was like, I have to, I must. If we were in person, I would have been like, hey, oh my gosh, let's keep this rolling. But don't feel obligated if you have
I have
other
a
thoughts.
response.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'm in my project, I'm thinking about space as well as company, right? That there are you mentioned Henry VIII, like that's a King's Men play, and then Faithful Shepherdess is a children's play. And so thinking about how some playwrights, not Shakespeare, crossed, like between and the space. Shakespeare's book, Shakespeare's Two Playhouses, talks about the relationship between the globe and how different spaces bring out different aspects of a play. And I'm really interested in how I could think more definitely about how Shakespeare and Fletcher's collaboration in Henry VIII as performed in the Blackfriars is in conversation with Fletcher's other plays for the Blackfriars, right? And then, for another company, right? And then that we can also imagine that there were shared audiences, right, that would have seen the Children's Company at Blackfriars and then continued to see the King's Men when they moved in to that space in 1608. And so that's one thing that I'm really interested in thinking about in terms of that kind of cross-repertorial, like spatial ways that race is being constructed on the early modern stage.
Yeah, and I think just to jump on Emily's points, I think specifically with Fletcher and Shakespeare, right? To put those two playwrights into conversation feels so natural. We think about Taming of the Shrew and Tamer Tamed, but that feels like maybe we've not quite done that yet with like in terms of race. And I think that would be such a great conversation. And also I would love to see like theatre programming doing stuff with that as well. That's my big dream. Not that I have any say in any theatre programming. But I definitely think as well, just more generally, that idea of placing two plays in conversation that don't necessarily seem to fit at first is something that I use to generate a lot of my thinking. And actually, I talk about Tragedy of Mariam in conversation with David and Bethsabee, which is obviously like a biblical drama on the professional stage. But thinking about like, well, if these plays have kind of shared background, like a conversation between plays is just, yeah, I love it. So I agree, Yasmin.
Well, and that's how repertory is so crucial, like thinking about the theatrical practice of audiences seeing different plays over the course of, a week or a month, right? That we have already, these plays are in conversation with each other.
The last production before The Faithful Shepherdess was A Midsummer's Night Dream by Shakespeare. So it was a really good adaptation to look at The Faithful Shepherdess by John Fletcher, directed by Sarah Neville. And actually, when she did the production of Midsummer's Night Dream, and she asked the students, "What do you think we should do next?" And she was surprised by a lot of students saying, "The Faithful Shepherdess, you have to do it." And she's like, "Oh, you liked it? Okay." So we went through it. And even the students were very surprised because they like a lot of, the cast never read it before, and then they really liked it, and they said, "Okay, let's go for it." And shows up so many times in The Faithful Shepherdess. And then I remember The Island Princess by see how other in one form or another, right? Like the racialized language is showing up in the Midsummer's Night Dream too. So what kind of inspiration the playwright is getting from? But if there's a lot of repertoires, there's definitely inspiration drawing from other plays that are being that are being performed during that time, right? You get that inspiration, and the playwright goes and writes, because you can see some similarities, but between A Midsummer's Night Dream and Faithful Shepherdess going to the woods, right? And then you have these shepherds, and all of a sudden they're interested in each other, and there's lust, and so it was really, I enjoyed that we were able to do it right after Midsummer's Night Dream, and the audience also loved it. They did not like, "This is hilarious," and it's going to be available in February. We filmed it, so I'm so happy that people can see it finally, because I don't think we have a live performance of it since like a long time ago. 1633 probably. And we have access to it now, so you can hopefully be all get. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And monopolize this conversation, but I so appreciate your work and all of your responses. To me, a lot of the point of going to a conference is sharing your work, but also being inspired and, by the work that people are doing. And I already imagine citing you all. So this is just thrilling. Thank you.
Can I just say as well, thank you so much for your programming and putting us together, because even in our pre-panel discussion, we saw all the similarities in our research. So I just want to say as well, thank you so much for the way that you've put the symposium together, because it's generated a lot of really great conversations.
Also, shout out to Vanessa, who was supposed to be on this panel and I believe is doing comps or is about to do comps or something like that. So really good vibes to Vanessa, whose work sounds really awesome as well.
Okay, well, thank you so much for this fascinating discussion. Before we thank our panelists, I just want to give our audience an opportunity to thank Yasmin for the amazing organization of this conference. And I'd like to thank Leah, Dylan, Sheridan, Chris Fletcher, everyone who made this possible. And now, please join me in thanking our panelists for their incredible presentations, the fascinating discussion. I'm so grateful for all of this.